Good luck, guys. You're listening to Spill the Lassi podcast. I'm your host today, Arjun Singh. We have a slightly different topic today. The first one that we're doing kind of on the Punjabi diaspora as opposed to Punjab itself. And we wanted to talk about the Bhangra circuit and more particularly the North American Bhangra circuit. So today I'm joined by some of the most accomplished dancers in the circuit today. I'm joined by Ashmita Kaur, Harji Singh, and Kamaldeep Singh. All three danced on DRP, the Real Punjabis, UCSD's collegiate team, as well as Farishte, an independent team from LA, and some big accomplishments. Harji Singh is one of the only people to have won Bruin Bhangra twice with two different teams, first place both in 2016 and in 2022. Kamaldeep Singh and Ashmita Kaur have won both Bruin Bhangra and Bhangra Blowout, also with two different teams. And so these are some of the heaviest hitters in the circuit. And as an extra tidbit, Harji, Kamal, and I, with a couple of friends, in 2018 started LA Folk Arts Club, which is the basically the first folk Bhangra team out here in SoCal. So they know both the music and live sides of Bhangra. So thoda sareya da bahut swagat. Thank you guys for coming out, man. Sama karke. But really quickly before we kind of get into the discussion, I think for especially a lot of our listeners who may not be as involved with the circuit, I wanted to give kind of just a brief history of Bhangra kind of as it has turned out today and as we know it today. Bhangra is a very ancient dance. Its roots go back, as far as we can tell, hundreds of years. But it was obviously in a very different form, right? Bhangra is actually kind of an umbrella term in reality for a lot of different folk dances of Punjab. And a lot of these dances were performed in different contexts on their own. You might, of course, be familiar with Chummar or Luddi or Jindua. And, there are still, especially in Punjab, but even now in the diaspora, teams that'll do, exhibition performances of just these individual folk dances. And the root really is celebration, especially of a good harvest, and obviously its roots are in farming. It's a celebratory dance, and the roots are also like sort of a spontaneous, right? The kind of idea we have now of this organized dance where it's choreographed and you practice, like that's not really what it was hundreds of years ago. It was you would go to a mela, there'd be a tolli, and you guys, people would just, based on their knowledge of the rhythm and listening to the toda, you would know kind of generally what moves to do, just kind of by being part of the culture. And Bhangra, though, as we kind of know it today, though, really shifted a lot in kind of the 1950s to 1970s, post-partition especially, in East Punjab, Indian Punjab. And there was there were some early pioneers of this form of Bhangra, Lal Singh Patti, really, mashhoor, very famous tolli who actually lives in Stockton, California today. And kind of some of his contemporaries really kind of turned Bhangra into what it is today, which is a heavily formalized, choreographed, coordinated dance that incorporates all of these different lok naches of Punjab into kind of one dance that we know as Bhangra, which is doing a set, a routine, whatever you want to call it, with props, and then chummar, tamal, luddi, jatta, all of these different moves. And all of these moves and the lyrics that go along with them in the boliyan have very specific meanings. Pretty much every move has a specific name. And there's a lot of history and context to every aspect of Bhangra. And it's kind of interesting. There's, the circuit in Punjab, the Bhangra circuit in Punjab is actually very similar to the American Bhangra circuit in particular in a lot of ways, because the Bhangra circuit in Punjab is also based in colleges, and colleges have different teams. In fact, at some of these colleges, even different departments or different majors have their own team. So the electrical engineering department will have a team, and the math department will have a team, just because there's so much more interest. Which is a little bit different from like the Canadian Bhangra circuit, for example, which is mostly private academies, right? So it's actually more similar over there to the American context. And they have these, what they call interzonal youth festivals, right? Or Khetri Yuvak Mela, or festival, where these teams compete with each other. So that kind of, and then in the diaspora, I would say a lot of it really started kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s. Honestly, a lot in LA, frankly. You had obviously Bruin Bhangra, like probably the or one of the longest running Bhangra competitions. And then you had a lot of independent teams that were very famous, like Khalsa Junction and Share Foundation, that really kind of came up in the early 2000s. And then also a lot of college teams that came up around the same time. And that really kind of spread Bhangra in the diaspora, first kind of in the US and Canada, and then a little bit later to the UK and Australia as well. But I think one thing we wanted to kind of ask with that background is, one thing I should have mentioned is Kamaldeep Singh, before it came to the US, also danced with Lalpur Khalsa College, Jalandhar. One thing I've been curious about is, I mean, live Bhangra still obviously rules in Punjab, but I feel like they have a very kind of burgeoning music scene now. Like I think Bhangra Arena is the comp in Delhi that had like a music category, I think, if I'm not mistaken, or one of the comps.
I believe so.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was more than that. I think but we were most focused on the live aspect, so I don't know.
Yeah, so that's definitely true. But so what do you think, Kamal, is like, do you think like music Bhangra is becoming more popular in Punjab? And I would imagine that's really like one of the rare situations where they're taking influence from the diaspora and like Western countries, right? Where like there's a couple of these teams like making mixes and stuff like that, which, obviously most comps are just live, but is music Bhangra on the come up a little bit over there?
Yeah, definitely. I could say that music Bhangra is on the rise. I also want to mention that, music Bhangra was, I think it's also on the rise because, in older times, music Bhangra was used for like, for example, like music videos, or you have to go to a wedding, like for gigs, right? For example, like there's this hotel Haveli, like, you would get hired to go dance out there, and, only for those purposes it was used. And yes, definitely it's on the upcome. It's coming up in Punjab as well, but still live Bhangra is the main emphasis there,
sure.
which I think how it should be.
I mean, I'm biased, but I would agree. So one thing you touched on that I think is a really interesting conversation, and you having grown up there, and I think even me, for having been to Punjab many times to visit family and having a lot of family there, is kind of touching on this music live Bhangra distinction, which I think you're right. The music Bhangra in Punjab is kind of associated with not competition level Bhangra, but like these other things, weddings and music videos. Yeah. At least from like my relatives there, right? Like you kind of hear this term nachar, right?
Yeah.
And there seems to be this very big distinction in Punjab between people who do, kalo asli Bhangra, right? Yeah. On a team, and they kind of know the art form, and, they compete in college or something, versus people who dance at like gigs or for music videos and like, or like at weddings. And like here, it's funny for us because I feel like here, a lot of us who danced on teams also did gigs. Mm-hmm. But I feel like it seems like that's not the case there. Like people who dance on teams are like very well respected as like athletes almost. But people who dance, as nachars are actually like looked down upon heavily, from what I can tell. Is that something you think is true?
That is very true. And I don't know, how and when this downgrading like term was generated as nachar. I mean that's also like a type of a profession.
Yeah, for sure.
For a certain group of people, and I don't think that should be used. And yes, it is still. It's Again, this term is still being used there. A matter of fact, it's being used here as well, and I still hear it time to time. You're definitely not well respected when you're dancing at the wedding, you get hired to dance on certain gigs. You're not well respected, and I think that stems another issue that is basically Punjabis. They don't come out as often to get into dance, get into Bhangra,
or art in general, maybe.
Or art in general,
yeah, for sure.
Because it's still it's still seen as downgraded. It still is used in downgraded terms, which is why I think there's less number of participation still in Punjab. However, it might be less here, but then also that's also comes from if you're that for specifically talking for kids at a young age, that also comes with parents being educated, parents being more open and more understanding of this of this art form.
Absolutely.
And I just wanted to add to that some of the incentives that might exist if the art form, in gigs or in wedding settings, was respected around payment. You might see more individuals looking to join those spaces, but instead we often come across opportunities where we're dancing with huge artists on massive scales, and still we aren't offered payment.
And I'm assuming that's here, right? It's not even like it's in India. It's like here.
That's here.
The dynamic is still, you're not sort of expected to be compensated or whatever it is.
Exactly.
Interesting. So, I mean, I think we all know the amount of joy Bhangra has brought each of us. So the positives of Bhangra, I think, are pretty self-evident. But I think, fortunately or unfortunately, we wanted to focus on some of the issues that we're seeing currently, with trends in the circuit, which, may be negative. And one thing that, maybe turning to Harji and Ashmita a little bit, I wanted to get your perspective on is one thing that I've been noticing over, since I was going to competitions as a kid to watch when I was, 2005, 2006, 2007 as an elementary school kid, versus now is attendance really seems to have declined at comps, in terms of just audience members. So one thing I've noticed is when I was a kid, people would go to a Bhangra competition to just watch from the community, just for entertainment, not because they were just going to support their patija or something, right? I feel now it's, you only go to support someone who's dancing. You don't go because you just want to go and attend.
Or you're
Bhangra
just a
competition,
sponsor.
Right?
And
Yeah,
you're
you're a sponsor,
you're
right?
a sponsor.
Some utility is involved, right? And when I was young, 2006 and stuff, 2007, Bruin Bhangra, for example, was Long Beach Terrace Theater, 3,000 person capacity was sold out. And now they can't even get 1,000 people there, for example. What do you think are some of the reasons for that today?
I think one of them is just the volume of competitions that exist now.
Sure, yeah, that makes
sense.
Right.
They are spread across the country, whereas at the time you're speaking of, I think there were just a few big ones each year. And so I think people were more willing to flock to those big ones and experience that. Now it's any time of the year I can find some competition that I want to go to and I can make that happen. Yeah. So it's not...
People did used to travel for Bruin, from far away.
In addition to that, something I wanted to add was that while it may be easy for people within the circuit to distinguish between different sets and styles, I think it's difficult as an audience member who doesn't have,
I think that's true,
that degree of understanding of the art to see the differences. And there may just be some general Bhangra fatigue, right? Where they're not interested in watching 8 to 10 teams do what is to them essentially the same thing.
See, that's such an interesting thing because I feel it's a good thing and a bad thing. I feel if you again, kind of going back to my childhood, right, with Bhangra, like Khalsa Junction and LBC, their styles were so different from each other. They almost weren't doing the same dance. Agreed. Right? They were you knew a KJ set or an LBC set when you saw one because it was just so different from everyone else's. Yeah. But you look back on those sets now and you're this is barely Bhangra. It's what we think of as Bhangra, where you're doing all the proper parts and aspects of Bhangra in a singular set. It's almost weird that music Bhangra has become more folk in a way, in that it follows that pattern. Yeah. But in doing so, it's kind of made distinctions between teams less apparent, and therefore maybe is
I think it's
arguably
also
more
their
boring
identity.
to a layperson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like their identity. Like what
Right.
identity do you bring? Like KJ was really good about bringing their identity, or
Absolutely.
even when they
Like
did
the
their
truck, right? Like you knew that was coming.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, pat on the back. Like DRP had their distinction too.
100%.
Like you would
Right,
know
absolutely.
when we came on stage. So
I think something that's added to that is in the past there was some stigma around dancing for other teams. Once you had a team, that is who you
Agreed.
danced for.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now people will move around the country for school or anything else, work, and will find another team to dance with, and with them they take their ideas. And so you see this kind of homogenous idea of what
Yeah.
Bhangra should be.
Do you think that some of the, I mean, I would imagine this is the case, but like, 2006, 2005, like social media presence is not really there as much. Like, do you think teams have been
Yeah.
able to become more connected across
a
the
mixer
country
was an
because-
actual mixer.
Right. Now, like everybody knows everyone. You can instantaneously
Yeah.
communicate with people, send each other mixes, send each other videos, send each other
much so.
everything.
Yeah.
And
Has
so-
that contributed to the homogenization, you think? Like,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And to add to that,
Yeah.
I think there's also fewer DJs in the circuit that are making a certain level of mix that teams are looking for. And so there's less variety in who's making the mixes. That's
very true.
Then
Yeah.
on top
The
of
number
that,
of Pablo mixes I've heard. I mean, respect to him. But
Yeah.
the
Great.
guy's
Shout
got
out
like a
Pablo
monopoly
Mix.
on
Yeah.
the circuit.
Shout out
does.
Pablo Mix.
Shout
and
out
then,
Pablo Mix.
and then another point to add is judging. All right. Sometimes a lot of the same judges will judge throughout the season, and teams will see the same judge at multiple competitions they're attending.
Yeah.
And
So they're trying to cater to that.
they're trying to cater to that.
Right.
And then when you have the same judges, then you also have similar rubrics.
Right.
And then not only are these ideas being spread, they're also rewarded.
Right.
And so now a team,
It's this feedback loop then, right? I mean,
and
yeah.
if you are just starting out, you want to build a team that's going to be successful. That's how you get people to join your team and continue dancing, right? There's a desire to win. And so, you just keep going, and then it contributes to this homogenous culture that we have.
See, that's
now.
very interesting. I didn't think about that, but you're right. Like when, again, that same time period that I'm talking about, kind of the early mid 2000s, all these competitions were run by like local aunties and uncles. I mean, sorry, judged rather, not run.
Yeah.
So like,
Same with judging.
yeah. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's
So
like
you would have different people at every
if you were
comp.
at SoCal Bhangra or Season Bhangra, it would literally just be like aunties and uncles who had a Bhangra background from Punjab in the LA Sangat
Right.
who would like judge. And then same thing in New York or same thing in NorCal,
Yeah.
whatever. Now it's like you said, the same few people just traveling around the country.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which is like
It's kind of cool also
it
because
is
like
kind of cool.
it's
in a
like
way.
cool because those judges came from different parts of Punjab too, so they had different understandings of like Bhangra in itself.
Very true.
Oh, I hadn't thought about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
That is cool.
That, and then you mix that with multiple different competitions happening around the country. That's like an even more distinction between each competition itself because there's like a competition identity too.
That's true.
Wow, yeah.
I also wonder if, in addition to just there being more Bhangra competitions, there's just more cultural events, period, now.
Yeah.
So, for example, right, like I think earlier on, to like kind of scratch your Punjabi cultural itch, like you only had so many options, right? Like I think in SoCal,
There was,
you
like,
had like
Bhangra
Darbare
nights.
Khalsa,
Oh,
and you
yeah.
had like LA Convention Center Nagar
Yeah.
Kirtan, and you had Bruin
Anaheim.
Bhangra, and like that was it for the year.
Yeah.
And like now,
it was like back to back.
it's like, and like now you have so many options compared to then, and so I think the people maybe who are connected to the culture but don't necessarily feel a connection to Bhangra specifically are just like, I don't need to go to a Bhangra competition to like participate in my culture.
Right.
Yeah.
So those are the people that just don't show up anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe they would have 10, 15 years ago.
Absolutely.
That's definitely something that I've been kind of thinking about with all this. But I kind of wanted to transition also to get all your perspectives on another issue that I think is kind of maybe a continuing issue in the circuit. And that's like women's experiences in the circuit, because I think that's something that's not talked enough about. I mean, I feel like there's kind of this background, maybe like, I don't know if it is like cultural perception that's like doing some harm continuously, which is like that women shouldn't be doing Bhangra in the first place, right? And that's
Oh,
like
yes.
contributing to the way that even we in 2022 treat women in the circuit. is that something that, I mean, like, I don't know, Kamal, maybe you can expound on this. Like, I don't know of any female Bhangra teams in Punjab. Like, maybe, I'm sure they exist, but maybe not to the nearly this. I mean, there's Gidda teams. They participate in Jindua, for example, right? Or Sammi, right? But I don't know of any all-female Bhangra teams at Khalsa College. You know what I mean?
Unless it's like Luddi.
Yeah, Luddi, right? Like individual folk dances, yes, but
Yeah.
not like I don't know. Are there?
Well, individual folk dances, yes.
Yes.
But in talking about specifically Bhangra, no. You
See,
won't.
that's so
you
interesting.
won't see a live team or music team. Like during
Really?
that
Yeah.
time, it was also difficult to bring girls into Bhangra. When I was there, basically that was like 2007, 2006 time frame. It was very difficult because not many women would, do Bhangra because it was there's still this backlash that women get in general, that women shouldn't be doing Bhangra. Oh, like there's this term that people use, or specifically talking about men use. I've heard it many times in Punjab as well. I've heard it here as well, which is basically, ਕੁੜੀਆਂ ਲੱਤਾਂ ਚੱਕ ਕੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੁੜੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੱਤਾਂ ਚੱਕ ਕੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਨੱਚਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ.
That gets me so mad.
That is something that
the thing is also, I've heard it like in Punjab, like itself, like talking to people in Punjab, like about that. Not recently, I've heard it before though. And just hearing that from your own like state that your parents come from, it's just crazy. You would think like, okay, maybe there would be some sort of supportiveness, but then carrying it on to here as well, not to that extent, but having that background in that, I mean.
And you would think when you come to West, you won't get to hear that.
Yeah, it's like, it's America.
But when I got to hear that here as well, I was shocked. I was left speechless, and I didn't know what to think. I was like, man, the world is still stuck in that space. There hasn't been any growth.
Also, Kamal, you should probably explain to anybody who's non-Punjabi on here what like you just said in Punjabi from Punjab. Just so that in case.
So
four of us
basically,
speak,
the four of us speak, so it makes sense.
No, that's a good idea.
So basically, a term that's people have been using in Punjab that actually brought over here as well, which is ਕੁੜੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੱਤਾਂ ਚੱਕ ਕੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਨੱਚਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, which basically means that girls shouldn't be dancing by lifting their legs. That's the term that is being used, and I think to answer your question, most of the teams you would see in Punjab are mostly Gidda.
Right.
Now, if you step outside of that particular area of Bhangra or this art form, if you step out of it, you'll see that all these events, all these gigs, they will have a lot more women.
Interesting.
They would.
So in the so-called lesser respected sort of aspects of Bhangra,
right,
then women will be allowed to be there, so to speak. That's messed up.
Right. And that's something I wanted to talk about, is that, so if you go to a wedding, right, people would gawk at them as looking at them like,
this is just great.
That's so creepy.
It is very creepy, and they would want attention from them as they're dancing on the dance floor and they're on the stage. They were trying to get their attention. So
I haven't seen this, but I think I know what you're talking
you
about.
can actually see the videos like on Instagram right now. They'll have literally all Bhangra dancers and Bhangra Vardis, and then these two girls who are just going back and forth doing stuff or doing like dances, and
then just like a bunch of bande on the ground, like
and
staring
I can
at them.
kind of see why sometimes in Punjab it'll be like girls shouldn't do Bhangra. Like, because that's the context that they think of. They don't think of us in a Vardi. Like like here you think of, okay, like I'm in a Vardi. It's like, for example, like me, Brew in 2022. I'm in a purple guy's Vardi with a chunni on. Versus there, it's like, nah, you have like a nice, very nice tight suit with like Punjabi
Yeah,
jutti,
it's-
like makeup, pounds of makeup, like your hair is did in a certain way.
Do you think this is changing at all with social media as well? Like Instagram, like there's a
100%.
lot of these, videos of girls in Punjab doing Bhangra. Proper Bhangra.
I mean,
like
that's
not
where I
wedding
got it.
Bhangra, right? Like, do you think that that's changing things in a positive direction a little bit, or is it still gonna take time?
Well, it is definitely changing. I do see a lot of individual girls are taking upon and dancing and
Right.
creating content, and that was not. Social media has changed a lot. Changed this specific area a lot, and girls are coming out a lot more with the with the content, and I think people are changing as well. I'm not saying that like people are still stuck there. It's changing. But then, again, if you go to a wedding there, if you go to a gig there, like you will still see this thing happen.
And it won't stop. That's the other thing. Like we can't just say like, oh, and bring awareness to it. And then Punjabi uncles are like, oh, maybe we should consider. Like it won't stop. It won't stop until somebody says no.
Right.
And those girls
That's
won't say
very
no
true.
because it's a way of living.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you can't
Yeah.
judge them.
You
in a lot of
can't
ways,
judge
right?
them either because it's also
you don't know
like,
their
this
situations.
is what I need to survive. And this
Yeah.
is one way I can survive.
Right.
So, and what do you think though? Because you, in addition to DRP and Farishte, you also helped start Shikari.
Yeah.
An all girls team, based in the US as well. How do you think, like I want to know a little bit more about your experience there because like how do you think all women's teams are perceived in this like, forget about Punjab for a second,
Yeah.
but just in the
Just
diaspora,
in
right? Do you think they're taken seriously? Do you think they're, sort of not taken as seriously as like guys teams
Yeah.
or co-ed
So-
teams? There's definitely fewer of them.
Yeah,
but
there's fewer of them because the idea around a girls' team is at least the structure of what people think of female team is that, okay, there's 2 girl captains, but there's also this guy coach. And I'm not specifically saying it from my team. The multiple times I've danced at RDR
happens
and
frequently?
yeah, it's
Okay,
frequent. Like I
interesting.
went to RDR and there was at least 3 teams that had guys like running their
just for
academy
background
teams.
for the audience, what's RDR?
Rani and the Ronak was a competition team back in 2019 that was strictly for all women and bringing all women together. And so me and a couple girls from DRP brought back alumni as well as current members and took our team there.
So do you think there should be more of these events like RDR? Because it almost
don't
sounds to me
think-
like the intention of it was to be like a Tiyan da Mela, right?
Yeah, it was like a Tiyan da Mela,
For those who
especially.
don't know what that is, Tiyan is a festival in Punjab that happens kind of late summer.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, in folk Punjabi culture, meant to be an event or a celebration just for women.
And no men
No- and
ever
typically no men are allowed, actually.
There aren't allowed.
Yeah,
if you show
are
up to the door,
not
I've done
allowed.
like 2 or 3 Tiyan da Melas and no men are allowed to walk through those doors.
Usually no men are allowed.
Unless like there's only like maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, and that is like a sponsor's just showing
Yeah.
up for like a
Or, like,
certain
some
hour.
logistical thing.
Or yeah, that's the only reason. Other than that, it's just to celebrate women.
And from my understanding, the Tiyan is a very old tradition in Punjab,
yeah.
but the purpose of it is exactly that. It's to have a space for women to. They do gidda at these things. They do other folk
Yeah.
dances. They have conversations, and the idea is for women to be able to be unfiltered, to have no male presence there,
And
to,
support each other.
and support each other.
They have a lot of women that come to these Tiyan da Melas have their businesses come to sell either jewelry, juttiyan, like,
Wow.
and we all like, we're in awe and we want to support them, but we also want these like nice things because, we don't go to Punjab often. And this
Yeah.
is like the way of bringing the culture back here where it's
Right.
home for us. So I think that was really cool because me and my mom were able to actually buy a lot of stuff from these vendors who were all women owned like businesses.
That's super dope. So sorry, going back to the earlier question also. So
Yeah.
do you think like it would be beneficial to have more things like RDR, like these platforms that kind of function as these like women only spaces? Or like what do you think is at least part of the solution?
Part of the
To
solution.
women not having kind of what like their own
Yeah.
space within Bhangra.
This sounds impossible, but it really is just team culture and being that one or two people that says, hey, we should look at these girls teams as competitors, not, oh, this is an all girls team. I actually tell this with Shikari. I'm like, every person who's on this team, like, yeah, we're on all girls team, cool, but you are on this team because of your skill, not because of your gender.
Right.
If I wanted to make it a unisex team, I could.
Right.
But I'm bringing together skillful women. Like the women is like the second aspect of it.
Right. It's not the primary
It's
thing.
not the primary.
Right.
Shikari is all women who have made their name in the circuit.
Right.
I think it's just bring the team culture that you set with your team is going to be the way we can go in changing this.
Right. So I have actually kind of a specific question I want to ask all of you, because I know this came up with Farishte, which is a co-ed team, but has more men than women on the team. How do you feel? We'll start maybe with you, Ashmita, and I want to get Kamal and Harji, your perspectives also, as like, when Harji, when you were captaining, for example, about in the context of a co-ed team, and I feel like this comes up with co-ed teams who have fewer women than men, so like Farishte, about the debate about whether they should wear men's or women's vardiyan. So, Ashmita, I want to get your perspective on this first. I know you have some feelings about it, but I think it's actually a very interesting question.
Yeah, it is a very interesting question, because you would expect, okay, I want to be my own person and be in a chunni. But and this is not in any negative way possible, I think with just my experience and how much I've trained in this art form, I'd rather be a guy on stage. I'd rather wear the bug.
Do you think you're just taken more seriously?
I am taken 100% more seriously.
Right.
And I'm also taken, I also have to think about, at least for me, we also think about captaincy and teams also within the team. Like, what did they have to do in order to put the best set on stage?
For sure.
And it will have to be that, formations is a big thing. And the way the formations work is you have to match up to the same gender.
It has to be symmetrical.
It has to be symmetrical.
Yeah.
And, again, I had a great time.
Like the people, the judges' audience are
they're more gravitated to
judging,
looking at the guys.
more,
to be to be completely honest, that's where I started getting a lot more compliments when, not that I enjoy having compliments. I get very but I started getting a lot more compliments once I was a guy.
Interesting.
Because, girls are like, oh, that's cool. But you look at a guy and you're like, wow, you're grand, you're big, you're wearing a bug. Like,
right. There's that
it's more that
idea, right?
we're in your face, versus girls is like, oh, like, you guys are cute.
So, Harji, I want to get your perspective on this, kind of as you were dealing with, this situation for the first day competitions. Like, the counter argument to me, it seems, or not even necessarily counter argument, but another perspective maybe, would be like, if we are trying to create an environment where women feel comfortable to do Bhangra and are viewed as being just as able to participate in Bhangra as men are, it's like, why should I have to, so to speak, look like a guy in order to be taken seriously or in order to participate in this dance? So I should be able to wear a chunni or dupatta or even in certain contexts, maybe pajama instead of chadra. And that's on the audience and the judges to take me as seriously. That's not on me. Like, I'm not going to change who I am. What's kind of your perspective on this? How did you kind of, maybe formations, maybe some other things, how did you make these decisions when you were determining this, as one of the captains for Farishte?
So, yes, I agree that everyone should be able to wear what they want to wear on stage. However, the aesthetics of the performance do play into how we do at the competition itself, right? What placings we get, as well as our reputation and ability to build out formations or just experiences that audience members enjoy. Now, fortunately for us, when we had this conversation with the women on our team, we were able to come to some sort of consensus on what they wanted to wear and what we wanted to have our performance look like. there was a situation where that wasn't the case, and in the end, we had to add more dancers to stage in order to make it feasible that we could have both of those things happen concurrently. Was not easy. And it's certainly difficult having these conversations with women that just want to be themselves on stage, and to come with this argument that, oh, but like the points matter. It seems so minuscule in comparison.
Right.
Like, who cares? It's just points. You know, we want to participate in our culture, just like you're saying. And unfortunately, that's just a reality. And I think
People want to win.
people want to win, right?
Yeah.
And I think, like I said earlier, you know, that plays into whether people want to continue dancing on a team, whether we get into other competitions, how we're perceived within the circuit. And if we're putting in this amount of time into, you know, building a set, we don't want things that are relatively small, like an aesthetic difference, to be the issue for a judge.
Yeah. One, I think, transitioning now topic that I really wanted to discuss with you both, and I think there's a good transition here because you talked about kind of regulation of the circuit in this context, Harji. And for me personally, this has been kind of an elephant in the room in the Bhangra circuit for a long time, but I think really came to the forefront for me personally recently with the Kisan Morcha. And what was happening in Punjab in 2020 and 2021. And that is the topic of cultural appropriation in Bhangra and non-Punjabis in the Bhangra circuit, largely. Because I think that this has kind of been a background issue from my perspective, where people who are not Punjabi want to participate in this culture, in this dance, in this celebration. But then when it comes down to speaking out on issues affecting Punjab, you know, are pretty much silent, or in some cases are politically opposed, whether they even realize it or not. And I think that had been kind of frustrating, but it never had boiled over at any point. But I think for me personally, that changed with the Kisan Morcha, because the Kisan Morcha was about farming, and Bhangra's roots are in farming. Right? Farmer would have a good harvest and they would celebrate. That is exactly what Bhangra is ultimately about. I think a lot of people don't realize outside the Punjabi community is Bhangra is not just a dance.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, especially on social media, didn't realize that. Like, it would be said so many times. Yeah, it was like, oh yeah, like, you know, when you start the first day you come to Bhangra classes, Bhangra comes from farming, and then that's it. There's nothing else added on top of that.
It's not a continuing conversation, right? And a couple of things that I wanted to note that I think are honestly some uncomfortable conversations. And I don't think we, not to create an us versus them dynamic, but I don't think we as Punjabis have done a good enough job of speaking our minds on this issue, because I've had private conversations with so many people about this topic, and people have not really been able to speak out, I think, until very recently with this issue. So the dynamic, how I see it is, you know, kind of like you have a situation, and I think this is a lot more prevalent in two contexts in particular. One is in the US compared to Canada, for example, because in the US, the Bhangra circuit is largely based around colleges, versus in Canada, it's around these private academies. I think that's one dynamic. I think the other dynamic is, in Canada, Punjabis make up a much higher percentage of the overall South Asian population, as opposed to the US, where we make up a relatively small percentage of the overall South Asian population. And you have this situation where you have these colleges, particularly in like the Midwest and East Coast. It's, again, not as big of a problem in California from my perspective, where like these teams have zero Punjabis on them, or like almost none. And, you know, kind of what we're saying, you have this context where they're not particularly educated about the culture. They don't speak the language. They don't realize that Bhangra is not just a dance, and it has a lot more meaning behind it. And these are liberal college kids who in any other context would be the first to cry about cultural appropriation, right? And the idea of participating in somebody else's culture, but not standing up with them during their struggles, right? So in the context of, let's say, the African American community and BLM, right? And calling out people for participating in hip hop culture without supporting something like BLM and the African American community and their struggles. Or, we'll get mad about Halloween costumes when people wear like a Native American, costume or something like that for the exact same reasons. And all of those are absolutely correct stances and relevant and all the above. But somehow when it comes to Bhangra and Punjabi culture, this somehow completely goes out of their head and they forget about it entirely,
Agreed.
right? And this is the dictionary definition of cultural appropriation, quite frankly, right? And from my perspective, I think this is a much bigger problem with non-Punjabi South Asians as opposed to other people. So, white people and African Americans and, East Asian Americans and Latinos who participate in Bhangra, they, I think, fully understand, there is no doubt in their mind that they are participating in somebody else's culture. And so they come at it with a certain level of respect and a certain level of reverence. But non-Punjabi South Asians, and I'm speaking in general terms, but this is something I think we've all observed and talked about. I've talked to scores of people about this. Generally speaking, seem to have this sort of perception that, well, we're close enough. We're Indians, we can participate in this. This is, maybe an Indian dance in some way. We can participate in this without consequence, without having to do any research or homework or anything, even if other people can. And I think I just want to take a second to completely dispel this idea because it's frankly ridiculous. For those who may not be familiar, Bhangra is a Punjabi dance, plain and simple. It does not exist anywhere else in South Asia. Even other parts of, South Asia that are near Punjab, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, they have their own folk dances. They have their own cultures, and those should be celebrated. Those should be, promoted, and the people of those areas should promote that. As does every other region of India and South Asia, whether that's Gujarat or Bengal, they all have their own cultures that should be celebrated. But Bhangra is Punjabi, and that's it. Every song, every boli, everything is in Punjabi language, and that's it. So I think that needs to be made very clear that if you are not from Punjab, or your ancestors are not from Punjab, by doing Bhangra, you are participating in somebody else's culture. Just because you are from South Asia or from India, Bhangra is not an Indian dance. I think that needs to be just put out there, plain and simple. And we wouldn't, I think that's the thing that really frustrates me, is we wouldn't accept this in any other context. We would not accept a bunch of, let's say, non-African Americans, or in like a hip hop context, or like, even let's take it into like a South Asian context. Let's just say like it would be ridiculous for just like a bunch of non-Gujaratis to start a Ross team, for example, and just be like, yeah, this is cool. Like, we're not going to know anything about the culture. We're not going to know anything about what's happening there. We don't speak the language, but hey, this is fun. And there's a cool circuit out there. And we want to go to these competitions and meet a bunch of people and party. And yeah, this is a totally acceptable thing to do. We like, nobody would accept that, right? It's just because Bhangra is popular in this context.
It's different.
This, right? That, like, now people think they're entitled to it,
Yeah.
right? In a way, especially in the South Asian context. And I don't know, that's kind of been my frustration, especially during the Kisan Morcha. So there's a couple of contexts that I want to talk to you about, with you guys about. And one is, one of the starkest examples of this was when when I was with you guys, was at Bhangra on the Berg in Pittsburgh in 2021. And, some of the folks, when you guys won second, got kind of really impassioned because the competition was happening just after the Kisans had won the Morcha, right? Like the farm laws had been repealed. And, when the trophy was announced, we're, just very passionate and just, saying the slogan, Kisan Mazdoor Ekta Zindabad, and all these things. And the silence was deafening, right, from everybody kind of else up on stage from all these other teams. If you want to kind of talk a little bit about that and kind of what your experience was.
That silence spoke volumes.
Yeah, I mean, it was very clear. And I want to be clear. I mean, I think there were also plenty of Punjabis also who were not being particularly vocal.
And but I know a lot of those Punjabis too, and I know they're very much into what's going on too. And it was kind of surprising. And I'm not hating. I just it's just surprising to see that only our team, and you could rule it out as like, no, we wanted you guys to have your moment. Like, no, this is a chant that we all were posting about constantly on Instagram, even though we were all getting shadow banned for it, and continuing to post and continuing to talk about it, and raise money and everything. And this competition also before this day had happened, it just happened to happen that same day, because who knows if the Kisan Morcha was still happening even after that competition. We would have never known. It could be a different scene. Like, people could be hating on the teams for dancing, people could be hating on the competition for even running, but and
also for context, for what we're talking about with the teams, was when kind of some of the folks on first day were starting these chants and stuff, the teams that were kind of standing on stage, most of them were not clapping, not repeating these slogans. Again, could it be some other confounding variables? Maybe, but it was definitely odd, I think, to say the least, that they're just wasn't the same level of excitement, wasn't the same, forget the fact that they won a trophy. It was we're having a Bhangra competition right after the Kisans have just won this big battle. That should be reason to celebrate enough for everybody who's involved in Bhangra.
It was certainly strange to feel isolated within our own cultural space.
Yeah.
It's really just a great way to put it.
That's so true. I mean, it's such a weird way of
That's a great way of putting it.
As a Punjabi who knows what's happening in Punjab, we felt like the odd ones out somehow.
And we were all affected at some point too.
We all have family.
We all have family there. We all have roots there. It's hurting us. And
I think that's the thing, right? For people who don't have that connection, they don't internalize these things to the same degree. And that's not their fault.
Yeah.
That's not
agreed.
Nobody's hating on non-Punjabis in the circuit for being non-Punjabis in the circuit. It's just that you have to do a little bit more work
research,
to be able to genuinely participate in somebody else's culture.
No, I still agree with you. Everyone that was dancing should have already had that on their mind, given how big the issue was, and for so many months.
Given how big the issue was, and it was recently, a day before we go onto stage, was resolved, I think that should have been on everybody's mind.
Absolutely.
And that, to me, when I saw that nobody's talking about that, specifically for our team, we were beyond
joy.
We were so happy. We're dancing in our hotel rooms. And we're
the people who were there, you could see, we were all in the back before placings dancing. The celebration of what Bhangra really is. We were
really
doing
matters.
exactly what Bhangra is.
Now we have we felt that now we have the incentive to do even better on stage. We're gonna go dance our hearts out for them because they have won this morcha.
We were all happy on stage too. We were all not just to be back to the competition scene, but we were happy because home was happy.
Right. Right.
To not see that people not talking about it, or not being
sharing that joy
with anybody was it was disheartening. And even right before placements were announced, there was a dole. Our team started dancing because we were just so happy what had happened back at home, and we were just going off.
Yeah, our dolly just couldn't keep up at one point. We just kept dancing.
I think the frustrating thing for me is like one piece of evidence, for example, that kind of shows that maybe some people who are not part of our culture, Punjabi culture, have other reasons for being in the circuit, which is to have fun and just party and meet people, is look at the difference in demographics between the live circuit and the music circuit.
Yeah.
The live circuit is
Yeah.
all apne. It's almost, I mean, not all, but 99% Punjabis.
Yeah.
The music circuit is very diverse. I'm not saying that's intrinsically a bad thing, but like, if you are really trying to understand the culture and the roots of Bhangra, you would do at least both. I'm not saying you only have to do live. Plenty of Punjabis do both too. But like, you would think that you would really try to get an understanding of this culture you're participating in and where it comes from.
Yeah.
But the fact that there's like almost no non-Punjabis in the live circuit is like very telling to me.
Yeah. But the thing
Personally.
is also, you know, the places you live around, you have to think about this in the US, there's not a lot of live representation outside of California.
Which is
too.
fair. But
You know?
but here's the
Which
thing.
is-
If you can, as a bunch of non-Punjabis, start a music
Yeah,
team,
that's the other
why
thing.
can't you? And I'm not saying, again, like, why wouldn't you start a live?
Yeah,
and, like,
and-
and again, not just start it odai, but like consult people who are experts, figure out how to do it right. And okay, so you live in a place where there aren't any Punjabis, but you really want to, you can make an effort to figure out how to do it right. Again,
Yeah.
I am not saying non-Punjabis cannot do Bhangra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But figure out a way to do it right. And that's just one example. And so, for example, on LA Folk, we had a lot of non-Punjabis on our team, right? And I have so much respect for them because this is not their culture. They don't understand the language, but like they actually ended up learning some Punjabi. They know better than almost some of us, probably most Punjabis, like what the roots of Bhangra are.
Yeah.
And they had the courage to put themselves out there in this context where they are
Yeah.
outsiders and learn. And I have all the respect in the world, and I have no problem with them doing that. And I want to be very clear also, because I think listen to episode 4, What is Punjab, of Spurgeon Lassie, for more context. But I mean, I think like the 4 of us sitting here today are Punjabi Sikhs. And I think, you know, I am also not saying, and I want to be very clear, that Bhangra somehow belongs to Sikhs. That's not true. It's not a religious thing. It's a Punjabi cultural thing. I think descriptively speaking, it is true that Sikhs have molded Bhangra the most into what it is today, for example. So Lal Singh Patti and, you know, his contemporaries in the 50s to 70s who kind of made Bhangra what it is today were Sikhs. And if you go to Punjab, even today, and like to live comps, teams will like do shabads at the beginning, right? Like they will say a line from Sura So Pehchaniye or like De Shiva. They'll do Jakare.
Yeah.
And they'll have lyrics in their shares like Asi Putt Tahan Guru Gobind Singh De, right?
Yeah.
So it is true that like Sikhs have kind of been at the forefront of propagating Punjabi culture in a lot of ways and Bhangra. And it's also true that in the diaspora, actually a lot of competitions and teams started from Sikh student associations at colleges.
Yeah.
Right? It was a lot of SSAs where like this, and then obviously it's grown since then and diversified since then. But so all of those are descriptively true. I personally feel that despite the history, any Punjabi, regardless of if you're Muslim, Hindu, Punjab, like Sikh, you have as much right to Bhangra as anybody, any Sikh or anybody else. It's not a Sikh thing or a religious thing. But I think that doesn't necessarily extend, obviously, to other South Asians, right? I mean, it's for Punjabis, regardless of your religion, and anybody else, you know, is welcome to participate if they bring the certain level of respect and awareness and education. I think that's just my perspective. I mean, I think the solution to this is what's tricky, right? I am not personally advocating for, you know, non-Punjabis not participating in Bhangra. I mean, I think that's one, silly, and two, like, not doable per se. But I think from my perspective, there's a couple of things. I think one is, I think self-policing, right? Like if you are a non-Punjabi, just like stop and think for a second. Like, am I approaching, do I know anything about the culture, anything about the language, anything about what's happening in Punjab? And I want to dispel one counter argument, which is like, well, a lot of Punjabis don't know that either. That's fine. That's a problem. It's a huge problem. Maybe it's even a bigger problem. But that's not cultural appropriation. That's Punjabis not being educated enough about their own history and culture and language. And that's a problem that we Punjabis need to deal with internally, right? But that's not cultural appropriation, right? So, stop and think, like, am I approaching this with the right level of... Do I really have the authority to, with not a single other Punjabi in my college, start a Bhangra team? Does this make sense? Would I accept this in the context of any other culture or participation of that culture? And really just like stop and think for a second, right? The second thing I would say is I think Punjabis need to get a little bit better about calling people out, right? I'm not saying be ruthless. I'm not saying be mean. But if there are people who are doing these types of things, say, hey, how about you talk to this person to learn more? And I think actually the judge in question did exactly this in a very diplomatic way. He was making the speech about the Kisan Morcha, and he was saying, look, there are a lot of non-Punjabis in Bhangra, and that's okay. It's a great thing. And if you don't know what the roots of Bhangra are, ask. It's okay. We're not like, and Punjabis, we need to do a better job of like not being mean about it, right? Like if somebody doesn't know, like, oh, you don't know, you're not Punjabi, like not being, exclusive about it. But, we need to kind of both encourage people and also call them out when they don't, to say, hey, just ask, talk to people who are knowledgeable about what you are really doing on stage, right? I think that's the second thing. We need to grow a little bit thicker skin and be comfortable calling people out when we need to call people out. Right. The other thing, though, that I do want to bring up is the issue of judging, right? So for me, judging is a little bit different than just participating, because now, kind of as you said in the very early part of this conversation about how judging kind of creates this feedback loop and molds the circuit, right? We have a lot of non-Punjabi Bhangra judges. That for me is a little bit more uncomfortable. Again, I am not saying you cannot judge Bhangra if you're a non-Punjabi, but kind of going to this point of Bhangra is not just a dance. Just because you're a good dancer doesn't mean you're qualified to be a Bhangra judge. If you do not have the requisite knowledge of the culture and language and everything, I don't think you should be judging. I actually personally believe, I don't know if anyone else agrees with this, is like, you shouldn't be a Bhangra judge, even a music Bhangra judge, if you don't have at least a working understanding of Punjabi language. Even Punjabi or not Punjabi, I don't actually care either way. Like regardless of what your ethnic background is. Yeah. Because Ashmita, I wanted to talk to you about this. I think there was actually a situation that you faced, without naming any names, where, and I want you to kind of explain it more, but like there was you did like a gimmick that related to a lyric, and a judge was like, oh, that gimmick didn't hit. But it was because like they didn't know what the lyric meant. Yeah,
didn't know what the lyric was. And there were Punjabi judges on panel that were like, oh, we understood, but we could understand why they couldn't understand. Like, I think my takeaway was they said, you need to make it make sense for those who don't understand Punjabi. That was my takeaway. And I'm like,
no, you are coming to us.
Absolutely not. That makes no sense.
That was what my takeaway was from it. Again, I'm not saying like don't judge. I'm just saying like I don't want to hear that basically, oh yeah, we didn't understand it, but you need to make it make more sense.
For non-Punjabis.
And I'm like, I'm over here ridiculous. The thing is also, I do have a little bit of a slight of an advantage from having a Punjabi culture where I'm like, wait a minute. Versus, if it was a like South Asian who's non-Punjabi, they might be like, oh, okay, like it makes sense. Like I could probably do better. But in my context, I'm over here like, wait a minute.
Yeah, I mean, like, we're not going to change our culture and folk dance for you.
Yeah, I mean, I could take away like, okay, maybe you could have done other ideas in the segment, but to just rule out like, yeah, it didn't make sense. That I didn't, and especially with you were talking about earlier about qualified judges, especially those who don't have the basis of Punjabi language. Like, I think personally, like, you do judge, at least ask. Like, okay, they did a certain gimmick. Let me go to the next possible Punjabi person next to me, tell them, hey, I remember they did this in this segment. which is, I think competitions do very well lately, where they have at least one Punjabi person on each panel, or they do their best to.
I mean, that's a low bar. In
Yeah,
my
but
opinion,
the thing is
fair
also
enough.
it's an attempt, right?
Yeah.
So you would go up to that judge and be like, hey, like, I didn't understand this. What were they trying to
I don't
do?
think anyone here is asking for complete fluency.
Yeah,
Like, I mean,
I'm not
it's,
saying
you
you
know,
need to completely understand Punjabi, but at least don't be afraid to ask
yeah,
before, just ruling out, hey, yeah, it didn't make sense.
yeah. That I agree with that.
And so,
So I would say judging from my perspective is the one area where there does need to be like policing. Like I do think competitions need to take it upon themselves to vet judges more from like a true cultural understanding perspective as opposed to just a general dance perspective.
and that doesn't mean like grab the nearest uncle. It means
No,
like,
absolutely not.
please
No,
check
no.
the background.
Yeah, like
Before doing
you
so?
need, I mean, Bhangra is a dance. It's just not only a dance, right? I think that's what I'm trying to get at, right? So you obviously need to be qualified in terms of understanding how the dance works, but I do think that is where competitions should play a role in policing. Another thing that is related but separate that I wanted to talk to you, and I think we'll kind of wrap it up with this conversation, is what really is the role of Bhangra, right? So it is a celebration. That's its roots. But I think that our generation especially has kind of, maybe not just our generation, but maybe we've expanded upon it, of this idea of art in general as a medium for social change, right? Not just art for aesthetic reasons purely, or XYZ reasons, but some higher purpose or greater meaning coming from XYZ art form. What do you think Bhangra's role in that is? Because there are so many issues that all of us just care about as Punjabi kids in the diaspora, where whether it's the Kisan Morcha or in certain contexts post 1984 issues, and water rights in Punjab, whatever it is, that all in some way tie back to Bhangra and Punjabi culture. And I think we're kind of confused as to what Bhangra's role in this should be, if at all, right? So for example, when the Kisan, Farishte, doing these chants after they won, and bringing awareness at the competition, right? Or, things like that. Like what are some, creative, I think another one was certain teams have done fundraisers for social movements, whether in Punjab or not in Punjab, right? I think there was one even that was done for BLM, for example. Maybe you guys can talk about that, where like, fundraising in terms of selling t-shirts, or, the proceeds from the Bhangra competition. This has been going on for a long time, going to a certain nonprofit organization. Where do you think are some of the roles for Bhangra to participate in this? So one is definitely cultural preservation. Kamal and Harji, getting your both perspectives about the role of Bhangra in social change and social movements.
Right. I think it certainly can be a medium for social change. I think something that has held the community back in the past has just been this characterization of Bhangra as a happy dance. It's, like you said at the beginning, a celebratory dance. And so speaking of issues that may appear to be negative is generally looked down upon.
Yeah, I guess that's true, right?
As
It's
a concept,
not ultimately like the essence of Bhangra in a lot of ways,
essence of
right?
Bhangra, exactly. And that's understandable. However, I frequently see, other communities, whether it's in the Bollywood circuit or in the hip hop circuit, use their dance as an opportunity to talk about problems that exist within those communities.
I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think certainly there has been some movement in that direction. There have been teams that have tried to evoke other emotions besides just excitement and that wow factor, right? DDR, when in their Bruin 2018 performance, did a great job of evoking this nostalgia. KPGD in their Bruin 2017 set, right, had this evolution of Bhangra, right? That's not the general format that we expect.
Right.
But certainly had a massive impact on the audience. Right?
They also did something, I think, in another year where they like try to tell the story of Hiranja or something
Right.
through a set, which I thought was very interesting as a concept.
It's an interesting concept. So I think, now that we've spent probably 10 years following this SGPD Elite 8 format,
Revolutionized the circuit.
it was incredible then. It's still incredible to watch now. I think teams have innovated in new ways, but we generally see the same thing. And I think audience members, like we talked about at the beginning, don't see a great distinction between these sets. And I think that's contributing to the lack of attendance. And so I think if we want to continue to develop the art form, we need to take the dance in a different direction. And I think opening ourselves up to this idea of using Bhangra for social change could be that route. Telling stories, building on the themes that we've already seen, but really tackling these issues. That doesn't mean that we have to let go of what Bhangra is today, right? We can still do the creative choreo and the formations and the gimmicks, but perhaps give it more meaning so that it lasts in our memories, not just as a moment of wow, but as something that actually drove some sort of change for the Punjabi population.
And that also has to go with mixing, like music. That's the basis of where we're able to even dance to for music teams, especially. Like creating different themes for mixing as well throughout the years of, songs. And now people are putting songs together just to put songs together because they sound cool, or tweaking a hit. Even there, I think that's kind of like a big conversation.
I think that's actually an interesting point, because I think one of the counter arguments that could be raised to some of this cultural appropriation stuff that we're talking about is like, well, in music Bhangra at least, it's like, I think the argument would maybe be made by some people, you have hip hop beats in it, you have other cultures, so to speak, sounds and music into it, music Bhangra is like an evolution that is like born out of the diaspora in like a diverse context. For me, I think I think they're right in a lot of ways. And I think we should be thinking about that when it comes to, okay, we're adding this hip hop beat. Are we really thinking about the social movements associated with that group of people, right? And being mindful and respectful of that. But I think ultimately it's still Bhangra. You're still following the format of Bhangra. You're wearing Bhangra vardis. Most, if not all of the songs, except for a couple English words here and there, are going to be in Punjabi. You can't say that this is somehow a different dance. It is Bhangra. It is a different form of Bhangra. It is music Bhangra, modern Bhangra, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But this is not the same thing as a Bollywood team doing like a 30-second little Bhangra segment in their otherwise Bollywood routine, right? That is a different thing to me, right? And that's segment. Fine, right? The music Bhangra scene is still Bhangra, right? And I think the requisite amount of respect and cultural knowledge has to come with it regardless. Absolutely. But I think, this was hopefully super insightful for at least myself, and I hope for audience members in terms of thinking about, some of the challenges in the Bhangra circuit, especially, for us in the States and in North America. And I think, it should just be something that people are continuing to think about as they participate in the circuit. And, it'll be, I think, interesting to see how the circuit evolves in years to come. Thanks for everyone for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and see y'all in the circuit. We ain't done yet.
It's all good.